Good evening, Crows fans, and welcome to a special draft night edition of Tuesday Night Live. Yes, your calendar is correct. It is Wednesday night, but we don't care because we've had a pick in the first round this year, and we're all pretty stoked with the outcome, I think. So without further ado, Peter, how are you?
I'm good, Fiona. And Nikki, how are you?
I'm going very well. And hope you're well too, Fiend.
Oh, yeah, I'm all right. Kicking goals. No Macca tonight. He's bailed probably because he got every draft prediction wrong, I think. Macca, if you're listening.
I said we were going to do it.
Yeah. And Donkey might be around a little bit later, but plenty to talk about. So let's just crack in straight into the news, shall we? And just before we get into the draft, just a quick shout out to Chelsea, who did her, and I didn't realise this until I saw the little note on the screen, but did her ACL on, was it Monday night, Nick?
Monday night, 45 minutes into training. Changed direction, did the ACL. She's renamed it the Awesome Champion Leaders Club.
Right.
The ACL club. So that's what she's decided it is. And she's already counting down the days and warning everybody for 2021.
Yeah. Big blow for the AFLW team. She's such an integral part. So I'm sure the club and the girls will get around her, but all the best to Chelsea. And the other thing is, and I commented on Twitter today, Stephen Hawking, is he actually like bipolar or something? Like, not to mess around with mental illness, but what the hell is wrong with that man?
It's just one of the most frightening ideas I've ever seen.
They have to tweak. They can't leave things alone.
It's just incredible.
I don't understand it. I mean, you're going to end up players appealing for holding the ball and it going upstairs, and we're just going to have like 5 minutes of live play and the rest is just going to be video reviews. Just ridiculous. But anyway.
They do everything they can to speed the game up. And when they've got it to the point where it's at breakneck speed, now they're doing everything they can to slow the game down.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Anyway, I hope everyone is getting us all right on Spreaker. I think so. Maddie said something there, but I think it's just you, Matt. So bad luck. So obviously we've had our first round of the AFL National Draft for the 2019 season. And before we actually talk about all the picks, we've obviously taken Fischer McCasey at pick 6. Just a pretty vanilla straight bat from Hamish. No messing around, no bids, no late pick swaps. Nothing of any nature from Hamish. Sauce was the one that did all that. What do we think of our pick at 6, ladies and gentlemen?
You're the floor, Nikki. Go for it.
I don't mind it. I mean, the fact that Sydney took Stevens beforehand, and I think we possibly knew that was going to happen, which was why we've shown quite a bit of interest in McCasey. As everybody has said, that it's always been those two outstanding players at 1 and 2, and then after that, it's quite strong and even for a number of picks, like well into the second round. He's definitely something that we need. I've only seen his highlights videos. I didn't really get to catch any of the under-18 champs this year. But from what you've seen there, great contested, intercepting marker, good height, and a defender that we need. I mean, there's talent, which is what Hamish said you do, but it also covered a need we really do have in our big man stocks.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Nikki, and without wanting to be pedantic, but we probably should all get on the right foot in terms of his pronunciation of his name. It's actually Mackesy. Yep. So it's Fischer McCasey. I was watching today. It's Mackesy. That's how you pronounce his name, Mackesy. So I thought it was a good pick. It was, obviously it was fairly well publicised. We knew what was in the box under the tree, and had sort of certainly heard that we'd spent a lot of time Fischer, and that he and his family were very impressed with the Crows, and I think that I feel for whatever reason I feel reasonably confident that he's a good character lad, and feel pretty confident that he's a stayer. And he 197 centimetres. He was the Vic Metro MVP for the state championships, under 18 championships. So he was adjudged to be a better player than those highly touted picks across the championships. And so I think there's no doubt that he was a very, very, very classy player. And I don't quite get the whole thing of people losing their minds just because we don't pick up a speedy midfielder with a high pick. I think that's important that we get a kid like Mackesy and who's been compared to an Aaron Norton type and has shown that he can go forward and kick goals as well. And so he's more of a Norton Hurley type player. He's a bit less like a Talia type lockdown type player. So he's quite sort of attacking, and so I think that in the end for me, I was very comfortable with the pick. And just looking at Hamish's interview a couple of days ago, he was pretty clear that 6 was, he would be very, very surprised if 6 was going to change it all. And he pretty much spelled it out. He said that they were interested in a key defender, and so I think you could have looked at that interview and thought, well, yeah, we're pretty sure what's going to happen on draft night.
Yeah, I'll go along with that, Pete. I think, we always said with the way this draft panned out after the top, 2 or 3, that it was one of those drafts where clubs were actually going to pick for needs a little bit rather than, perhaps best available. And it's whether you could argue whether Fischer was best available at that pick, but he was certainly the best available defender by a street in this draft class, and clearly a need on our list. Tars has probably got 2 or 3 left in him. We've got young Jordan Butts who's coming along, but quite young. So Fisher's obviously class, not only down back, but as you mentioned, up forward as well. So, and 197, 91 kilos, he doesn't have a huge amount of filling out to do to be at the level in terms of his build. He's a pretty measured sort of a character. There's a bit of tears on Big Footy about he's going to leave because he didn't seem all that excited. Well, everything you see from Fisher McCasey is very measured and very chilled, so I wouldn't read too much into that. The Crows have obviously been into him for a long time, so...
Remember how excited Jake Lever was, so...
Yeah, that's right.
One 200 gamer.
That's
Jake
it,
Lever.
future captain of the club.
Yeah.
So, look, all in all, I think Hamish going for the straight back pick, I think is indicative of how he views this draft. And as we look closer into the draft in a moment, there's still a fair amount of talent available to us at our next 2 selections. A couple of
there definitely is.
Yeah, look, there was a couple of surprises. I thought.
Oh yeah.
I thought Pickett went a bit higher than I thought he would. To Melbourne, I was a bit surprised about that. Will Day probably went a bit higher. Miles Bergman, a kid that I really like the look of, and I hadn't seen any footage or anything of him. But when he interviewed, I went back and looked at some footage. Cody Waitman at 15, I reckon, put a red circle around him. I reckon he's going to be a gun. And Port selecting a couple of left fielders. Mitch Georgiadis at 18, along with Bergman at 14. I don't think either of those would have been on most Port Adelaide fans' chalkboards at the beginning of the draft night.
And it's interesting, they're both, one's a back, one's a key forward. So, and that's where we know they've also got some issues regarding their tall stocks. And yet there's Will Gould. So there's a South Australian prospect. They actually went with the Victorian one for the defender. So I think there was they kind of got some raves about the players that they picked. But yeah, the Georgiadis one was very interesting. That was a hell of a reach early. I think that surprised quite a few people. I've seen some of the stuff that he's done. He actually looks quite a nice type. But they've still got a lot of really tall forwards on their books.
Yeah, and they got rid of a fairly handy key position player as well. George Artis, of course, didn't play. Did he play at all last year? I don't think or this last season gone. I don't think he did.
He played a couple, I think, but he's played more the waffle.
Yeah, but he had leg injury that kept him out for a lot of it.
Yeah.
So his bottom age form must have been good. I don't know a lot about him, but certainly I didn't expect him to go where he did. Probably the winner of the first round would be Gold Coast, wouldn't they? With trading up to get Sam Flanders at 11, they've three solid midfielders.
And they're three very different midfielders as well. That I think they complement each other quite nicely.
Yeah, that's probably reasonable, Nick. I think Rao's obviously the Rolls Royce of the draft class. But Sanders looks good. He's Flanders looks good. So I like his physicality around the contest. So I reckon he'll almost play round one. I reckon for them.
Does anyone feel like just tweeting Gold Coast and saying, "Now, are you right now? Are you okay now? Can we just leave you be for a while now?"
Yeah.
Yeah, let them develop.
Is there anything else we can get you, or can you just look after yourself now? And DSG, yes, I have got a virus. So thanks for pointing that out. George Artis was sorry, just getting back to him. George Artis was you're right, Finn. He carried some. He had apparently in the Colts final last year got a corky which calcified and ended up having to have an operation and missed a chunk of I think pre-season the early part of this year and didn't really get going, but was touted as being probably one of the best, if not the best pick that was going to come out of WA.
Yeah, right.
For this draft. So I think that maybe, bit along the lines of the Brodie Kemp kind of, what happens, they drift a little bit with those injuries. And,
yeah.
But from all accounts, probably a pretty good pickup.
Yeah. Them along with Fremantle, I thought Fremantle have done very well, 7, 8 and 9. Hayden Young looks a real good player. I reckon Caleb Sarong is a Monty to play 200 games. I really like the look of him. And Liam Henry could be anything as long as his height doesn't become too much of an issue. But it looks...
He's got footy smarts.
He's got a bit of silk about him. So Freo did very well, I thought, in terms of the way they positioned themselves. Obviously, Sydney, a bit of a surprise with them taking Dylan Stephens. He was in the conversation with Sydney, but I don't think anyone really expected them to take him.
No, I didn't expect him to go that high, to be honest. I thought he was going to drift to Carlton, but good on him. Had a great, great year at Norwood, and he was certainly in high calculations. And so I think that probably... I imagine we probably heard that he was going to be going, and I had a funny... there was a lot of talk around the fact that we were going to pick him up, and I think that if Sydney indicated it that early on that they were going to take him, that probably precipitated the trade back up to 6 for us. Well, no, we had 4, didn't we? What am I talking about? Sorry.
Yeah, we had 4.
Yeah, we had 4.
We had 4. So maybe we thought that he wasn't valued at 4. I don't know, but sorry, off track there. But certainly higher than I thought he would go.
Yeah, well, the talk was that we were going to trade down to 9, thinking that Stephens was going to slip down there, and we...
That's right.
But, so I must admit I was a bit surprised that they took Stephens, but, I don't think they'll lose out with him. I think he's a pretty solid player. I don't think he's a number 5, but I don't think it's the kind of draft, Pete and Nikki, that you really look at the number and go, yeah, he's a number 5 pick. Because really, as mentioned, I think there are a number of other factors apart from just best available that impacted where players went in this first round.
Yeah, and I think you look at the first 2 live picks that technically happened after Rowell and Anderson was a ruckman and then a defender.
Yep.
How often does that actually happen that high up in the draft? But they were cases of needs picks. Those kids have talent, but I think it was more on need that the club selected those particular players, and that's the same thing we kind of did with McCasey.
Mackesy.
I'll get it.
Sorry.
I will get it.
We'll get it.
That's going to take a while.
That's going to take a while, isn't it?
Yeah, Dude took a while.
So who are the real the sliders that are left on the board, given the fact that we've now got are now two quite enticing picks after Port and Brisbane tomorrow night?
Well, we've got Robertson, who was only the All-Australian captain.
Yeah, he's the big one.
Yeah, Will Gould, obviously. We've got Rantel, we've got Rivers, we've got Worrell, and Sharp would be the other one in my view. I can't think of anyone else
Surely Robertson doesn't get to us.
Oh, well. What are we at? We're at pick 20 for Port, so we're, 3 picks away?
So it's only Port. Yeah, Port and Brisbane have got picks before us tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So there's 2 more before us.
Do they need a player like that? And I don't think they do.
Well, Brisbane. So
Brisbane, perhaps.
tough, isn't it?
Brisbane, perhaps. But I tell you
what I like as well.
Yeah, see, we had this discussion.
Not a fan?
Well, we had a bit of a discussion about Gould last podcast, and
we did. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a bit dubious about his ability to get fit enough for the level. I really like Jay Rantel. I reckon he's like a good size for a midfielder. Mid 180s. Built fairly solidly for a young lad. He runs really hard. Had really good draft combine results. I wouldn't mind us taking him, and also he's Vic Country. So where does he come from?
Warrnambool.
So, good chance of not being a flight risk. So the only knock on him, I think, is his kicking. But I really like his bio. The other thing, and this is not to be punful because it's a bit of a thing with the podcast, he is an ex-basketballer, Pete.
Yeah, I was about to say. Not a bloody ex-basketballer. All you're going to get about poor Luke Jackson is that he used to play basketball.
Yeah. The thing about a basketball background at junior level is that it really hones their inside skills and poise, in my opinion. They seem to have an extra moment of time because they're used to working in close confines. So Rantel's the one I really hope we end up picking with one of those 2 second-round picks. And yeah, of course, you'd hope that Robertson drops. And if Hamish has seen fit to take Mackesy at 6 to shore up our key defence stocks, you'd think that he is fairly comfortable that we're going to get a couple of quality midfielders with the next 2, and with the players that are left, he can almost not miss. Who do you like, Pete?
Great. Oh, look, I'd be thrilled if Robertson, dropped. I mean, he was talked about as a top 10 selection, All-Australian captain, and terrific player. Would be very, very keen on him. But I'm a bit of a fan of Will Gould. I know what you're saying, but there's just some guys that don't necessarily look like great athletes that just can play football. And you look at someone like a Jeremy McGovern, who I know is a taller player and he's a key position player, whereas Gould is more of a Shannon Hearn type player he's been compared to. But some guys just don't, they don't present as athletes, but he's just a footballer. Do you know what I mean? And so I just have a feeling that he'd be a very, very good Shannon Hearn type for us. But yeah, Robertson is one that I like. And I tend to agree with you on
Rantel.
That he was the other one that I quite liked around that area as well. But the slider at the moment for me is Robertson.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the one I've got my eye on. And I just can't see him getting any. I'm kind of amazed he's got this far, and it's going to be one of those you just think, oh, could he possibly? And I just know that he's going to get picked up in these next 2 picks. It's going to shoot me off.
Well, a lot of, I think Toomey had him going at 15. to the Cats. A bit of a surprise, the Cats pick. They went with the local lad. Whether they were put off by the fact that Robertson is from WA, I don't know. But
the nephew of Darren Glass.
Yeah, look, I just think he's solid, isn't he? I mean,
He is.
He's got leadership qualities. Obviously, he's WA captain. He's All-Australian captain. Average 30-odd disposals a game at the Carnival. The only knock again is his kicking, but that can be taught, hopefully. But he's that next generation inside ball, really, in my opinion. Been likened a bit to Joel Selwood and players of that ilk. God, you'd love to have him. I reckon he's quality. It amazes me, some of these blokes. I think it was at Valenti last year, was the All-Australian captain and went it in the 20s or whatever. And they're just like, there's a reason that they get selected for those types of positions, And Valenti, all right, he hasn't got that same star quality as Walsh had or whatever, but he's going to play 250 games of footy. So, and I reckon Robertson's much the same. Whoever picks him up is going to have a 200+ game player.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Nikki, anyone that you?
No, I trust Hamish. I do tend to do that a little bit on this because whilst we see those highlights and we kind of have a look and we can make a bit of an educated guess, we haven't been tracking these kids for the 2+ years that like Hamish and his team have. And I'm always mindful that those highlight packages are always the highlights. They're not quite showing everything about that player. I really do like the look, as you said about Devon Robertson, that he's got all those psychologies and everything else. My little caveat on it, though, is do we need another inside mid? Because we've got so many of them and we really do need some speed. But if we're going on Hamish's you pick for talent and he's there and he slid, that poor kid had to sit through tonight and not get picked up and he was in the room.
Yeah.
I think that, you do it. You go on the talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I reckon
Harry Schoenberg. Schoenberg. Sorry, was the other one?
No, that's the one I was actually going to say.
Sorry, mate.
No, that's fine. Look, probably not as well developed in terms of being able to be ready to play, but a really smart, like from what I've only seen a few clips and highlights and all the rest of it, but he just looked a pretty smart player, Pete. Is that your impression?
Yeah. Yep.
So interestingly, for a kid who's touted top 30, didn't make the under 18 squad at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, that was a odd decision for him, and I was certainly surprised as well.
So he's one. Look, I don't think there's a couple of defenders left. I don't think we'll go another defender so high up. I think my read is that we've selected the best defender, but we obviously need mids. So I don't think we take Rivers. I don't think we take Gould, to be honest. Worrell's still there, but I don't think we take him either. So I think, if I think Rantel's a lock in one of those two, provided he doesn't get taken earlier. And I think if Robertson slides to our pick, I think Hamish won't be able to press the button quick enough.
Yeah, he'll certainly push on Robertson. That's for sure. And you may. I think your rationale is quite sensible in terms of Gould. For me, that's just a like. I just like him. But you're right. We've already picked a defender, and hard to see him going again. But yeah, Harry Schoenberg, I think, might be if Robertson drops at Port or Brisbane, I think that Harry will be the one.
You reckon?
Yeah, I think they'll go. I think they'll go Harry at one of those two positions.
So I mean,
he won. He was the state. He was the at the champs. He was the SA. He had the SA MVP award at the state champs. he had a good season. He fits the mould. He's from South Australia, 182 centimetres, 83 inside midfielder. I reckon. I reckon they'll pull the trigger on him.
Yeah. The other one that I was looking at now, I was looking at him. Where's he gone? No, I've lost him. So look, anyway, it's hard to get a read on what some of these other clubs are doing. But I was actually a bit surprised that Melbourne took Pickett with their number 2 pick, because I actually thought he might come down to our mid-20s picks. But it's a bit of a bloody raffle.
Yeah.
It really is a bit of a raffle.
Pickett definitely was one that nobody had picked in the first round. He was invited, and he was sitting there, but I think a lot of people thought nobody was going to jump too early on him. He was possibly going to go later. So I think he was definitely one of the draft jumps.
I definitely saw something on social media. It wasn't an anonymous. It was someone in the media. I can't remember who it was now, but it did certainly started squeaking out that Melbourne were keen on him at that pick, their second pick.
Yeah, I think they've definitely gone for players well ahead of the position in terms of the picks they were taken at.
Yeah, and he was touted pre-draft at a mid-range pick, 25 to 50. A mid-range pick, obvious talent. And that footage that they showed on the coverage of him laying that shepherd at the end there, that had his uncle written all over it. I don't know whether you saw that. He's basically just shoulder charged somebody. That was pretty funny. And his comment
afterwards when he was interviewed about it, do you like doing that? And he goes, I did it, but I was expecting to get the handball back and he didn't give it to me.
That's right.
It's just like there's a quality little bit of character around him, and he's one I did like, but I thought if he was there around our 22, 23 pick, then I would have been very happy for us to jump at him, even though he is quite small.
Yep. I mentioned earlier Cody Waitman. He was projected anywhere between 8 and 20, so a mild surprise that he went where he did, although, as I said, I reckon in terms of just footballer written all over him, he just stuck out to me for some reason. I don't know why, but he just stuck out to me as like a ready-made Rory Sloane type footballer, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Thompson Dow, did he get picked up?
Yeah, Dow went to Richmond with their first pick, which I don't think that was necessarily expected either.
No, I think that he's come in. He's come in from the cold for sure.
So there's a number that, like this, when you look at the draft projections, there's such a range for some of these. There's Hugo Ralph Smith, who's also a midfield forward, who's got great speed, a good leap, So he's one that could go anywhere from our pick down to, our through to the third round. But he's got some good stats behind him as well.
Trent Bianco was the other one that I was trying to think of as well. Trent Bianco, he'll be in amongst the 20s, I reckon.
Yeah, well, again, he's probably just a little short though, isn't he? 178.
178.
I don't know. He knocks up getting the ball. But I reckon he might go third round, to be honest with you. Don't know.
So who are you settling on for our 2 picks?
Well, for me, it's Robertson and Rantel. That's my 2. If I had my my Christmas wish list out, that's the 2 that I'd take. Nick, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree with it. Oh, sorry.
No idea.
Robertson,
I'm kind of no
I
idea.
absolutely agree with. I'd probably have Harry Scheinberg just in front of Jay Rantel, but I'd be happy with Harry and Jay if Devon gets snapped up at the start of proceedings tomorrow.
Yep. I can't. I think it's two midfielders. Don't you think, Pete? I don't think.
Yeah, I do. As much as I really, really like Will Gould, I've got a lot of time for him, and I honestly think he'll be a really good player. But I think you're right. I think that we've spent, we've paid a big price for a key defender. I'm not quite sure that they'll go with another defender.
Yeah, and our forward stocks look right, particularly now that they've brought in your mate Billy, Pete.
My mate Billy.
With him, the Berg, Darcy, and obviously Tech still running around. It seems, and we've still got the unknown prospects of Ben Davis, Sam. What's his name? McAdam. There. So
Yep.
we've got a bit of a fleet of smalls as well. So I think it's mids from here on in. I really do.
Yep, agreed.
And Hamish was very bullish about on that AFL interview, where his comment was of how they rate the list, and they think it's a lot better than what people externally are saying. And I did like his comment as we can't wait to prove people wrong next year. I mean, he's possibly going to back himself in because he picked most of those Kens and put that list together. But we do know he's one of the best in the business. And just rattling off those names there's a nice blend. And Pete and I, we've both seen a lot of it at the SNFL level. And there's definitely some talent coming through. They just need the opportunity.
Oh, hell yes. I mean, God, don't get me started on Ned and Chase. So
yeah,
that's why that's one of the reasons I'm quite comfortable with spending pick 6 on a tool, because I feel that we picked up, and we haven't seen the best of those two boys yet. I feel that we picked up 2 excellent players for the midfield. Don't anyone tell me that Ned McHenry is just a small forward either, because I'm not listening.
No, not at all.
So you've got those 2, and we'll pick up a couple of them in the 20s, as you're right, Fane. And of course, we can also add some stocks to a few stocks to the midfield game next year. But yeah, in a really, really strong draft last year, we've added 2 really, really good midfielders, and so I'm more than happy with where we're at in that regard.
Do we mess around with Port and put a bid on Jackson Mead? Because you'd think that he'd have to go soon. He'd have to go with Port's next pick.
Yeah.
Do we try and mess around with that?
You only do it as a calculated risk if you're willing to take the player.
Well, he's a pretty highly rated midfielder.
Now you can join Borlase next year.
I don't know. It'll be fun to watch. He's the only other one that sticks out to me as someone that you'd probably sniff around at, but they probably won't bother. The other thing, Pete, I was going to say earlier that stuck out to me, the fact that we weren't willing to use our 2 second-round picks in any sort of pick swap was probably an indication of how nicely the club feels their position for next year. They didn't want to use that 2020 GWS first rounder, which they could have packaged up with one or both of the seconds to get up the draft. So it really points to a bit of a draft splurge in 2020, given how we're positioned in that draft.
Yeah,
I think the Gold Coast, just on that, I think the Gold Coast pick the swap they did with Carlton and what they did regarding that, if there was going to be any movement from us, I think it was kind of around that mark, and what then happened, and then the Port picks, etc., and those other ones just kind of made us go, are we actually going to get value back that we want to at those picks, or are those players going to be there later, and why bother taking something out from next year that we can use?
Yeah, there was some chatter about trying to mess around and do what Gold Coast ended up doing, but I still think that I think Hamish would have gone harder trying to position in this draft if he felt the need to, but also if they were just stockpiling picks without any real purpose for 2020. But I reckon, there's obviously some irons in the fire for next year in terms of father-son and academy and whatever the hell else. So and now that we don't have to spend picks on trying to get Lukosius back, it's going to be a very, very interesting draft next year, I reckon.
Yeah, that's right. And look, they know exactly what's coming next year. They would be already positioning themselves for that, and they already will have positioned themselves for that draft. So I get the feeling that I don't think that Hamish was, overly enamoured with this particular draft. I don't think we've gone, as hard as we might have, as you say, Fee. We've picked up who we think we need to bolster the key position kind of area, and we'll get a couple of decent speculative mids in the 20s, and I think he'll be happy with his work and go home and then and reset and reload for a big year next year.
One last question. Any love for Luke Partington? Anyone?
No, you
Sorry,
cut out. I didn't know who it was.
I thought you cut it. You cut out then.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Any love for Luke Partington? Yeah.
Oh, look, I'd have him on the list in a blink. He's I think he's an excellent player, and he but what he gives you is really, really damaging pace. No, I would have some interest in him for sure.
Nick?
I reckon he might be that because Hamish has mooted a bit of fun around our pick 40. So it could be there, or there's the possibility of the rookie draft.
Yeah, I reckon he's a rookie draft prospect. Winning a McGarry doesn't guarantee an AFL list spot. Ask Mitch Grigg. Partington's also had a previous shot at AFL. He was at the Eagles before he came over to the SANFL. So it's not a guarantee, but I'm with you, Peter. I think he's worth a crack. If we can have a guy like Patrick Wilson on our list for 3 years, I reckon Luke Partington's worth a crack.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, just to piss off Glenn Helg as well.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing
Put him in the SANFL with Wilson.
Yeah. No, look, so I wouldn't be surprised if... I don't think we'll spend a pick on him, but I reckon we might pick him up in the rookie draft, unless we suspect that there might be someone else sniffing around, in which case we might spend a late pick on him. I think we've got how many spots we got? We got 5, haven't we, on our list?
I think 5, yeah.
Yeah, so...
And we tend to go more rookies, extra rookies, and less on the actual list.
Yeah. And this draft, I think there'll be a few blokes that slip through. I think it's such an even year that there'll be a few blokes that are a decent quality that could have easily gone, 30 to 50 that'll end up slipping through to the rookie draft. So there's probably going to be some bargains to be had in the rookie draft this season. But I reckon if they're keen on Partington and they think someone's sniffing around, they might just spend a late pick on him. Oh, well.
I've just been trying to find the name, but we finally know who that mystery third academy player is, because he's the one who's just recently been awarded the Crows Foundation scholarship. So he's the Port Augusta player who we've apparently been hiding off to the side, but I don't think we can hide him anymore. But he's the one who's been that mystery third player that's been talked about for next year, to go with Borlase and Jackson.
Okay.
Edwards.
What's his name?
Luke Edwards.
I'm trying to find his name, but he's from Port Augusta. It's not coming up. There was a tweet, but it was fairly recently. But he was announced as the Crows Foundation scholarship player for next year. Right.
See if we can find it.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of business to be done next year with some of those kids, and I'm very, very comfortable with our draft last year, because I still think that we got bargains in Hamill and Scholl out of that draft, and so yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with how we're rebuilding at the moment, and I think that we'll see. Excuse me, we'll see the emergence of Ned and Chase this year.
Well, there's no choice, is there? And one of the reasons that Nicky, you mentioned earlier that we've got a bit of a plethora of inside mids. The Grouch boys still aren't a lock for their next contract. So it'll be imperative, I think, that they give Jones and McHenry and those lads not just a run, but actually the opportunity to form the nucleus of the next Crows premiership tilt. You know, they can't do what they've done with Darcy Fogarty, I think, and just leave them languishing in the twos. They have to give them responsibility. They have to be part of Nix's game plan from the beginning. They have to breathe, you know, the ethos and all that sort of stuff, and the you know, build that core. I'd be highly disappointed if they weren't starting 22 next year. Both the two lads and also Jordan Gallucci. At least until he's had time to really expose his form in a not in a bit player role, but in a leading role, so we can just work out exactly what we've got with him, because I think it's still a bit unknown.
Yep. No, I couldn't agree more with that one, mate. And particularly, you know, Gallucci's a classic example of a kid that's just had bit parts, you know, all the way around. And the problem that we've got with him is that we just don't. We've seen, you know, bits and pieces that we like, but we just haven't seen that consistent performance. And we don't know whether, you know, we don't know that he's capable of that, and it's because he's not been given that role that he should be given.
Which we did see a hint of it in that Carlton game, where he got put in the middle and he was doing beautiful right foot, left foot passes, kicked how many goals, but he was playing as a midfielder where he should have been playing that outside run and speed that we
He's a good clearance player too.
Oh, yeah, he's got a beautiful combination between it that you can do. And Jones can do that as well, which is what I quite like. You need those players who can do it, because that gives you that mix in the midfield and makes it unpredictable. Instead of it's always going to be, if Matt Crouch is in there, he's definitely the one first to the ball, and you know that, you just have to stop him.
Yeah.
You need to have that flexibility and the switch around. The fact that he beat McHenry in the 2K trial was quite a nice little thing on the weekend.
Tariq Newchurch is the player you're thinking of, Nick? That's
it.
Yep. Thanks to the boys on Facebook and also on Spreaker for that. I mean, where would we be without them?
Exactly.
Also, just a quick shout out, where would we be without our 2019 sponsors? Ryan at Smith Partners Real Estate, just heading into the silly season for real estate. So good luck to all the crew up there at Smith Partners Real Estate at Golden Grove for all your buying, selling and rental needs. The lads down at Down to Earth Electrical, of course. Scorpus at Hardware on Box for all your geeky news and reviews, and our wonderful patrons who've been really instrumental in keeping us going this year. It's been fantastic to have your support. AFLCrowCast.com. Click on the orange Patreon button if you want to get in amongst that, or go to patreon.com/AFLCrowcast. Guys, there's not a lot else to talk about, really. It's absolutely shitful that the draft is split over 2 nights, because we're just about to hit the interesting bit, I think. Certainly for us.
Can we actually talk about how awful that actually was tonight?
Only for a second.
From the start to the finish, that the fact that you've got the CEO of the AFL who has to read surnames slowly off a list of recently retired AFL stars, because he can't prattle them off the top of his head, which, sorry, dude, you should be able to. If you're in charge of a league like this, you should actually know who the top players are. The fact that it became so obvious that the whole pick is in little dug-dug noise was only happened as soon as an interview had finished, that they were holding the draft up, that clubs were putting those picks in earlier, but those picks were being held up because they had to interview those poor kids who most of them really didn't want to be there and look like deers in front of a headlight.
Nick, I'm absolutely sympathetic and agree with you completely. And I think that, though, that the sooner that we all get our heads around the fact that the AFL is not a sporting body, it is an entertainment. It's a sports entertainment industry. It is much more akin to the WWE than it is to the NBA, for example. So as soon as we get our heads around the fact that the AFL is not actually a sporting organisation, it is a sports entertainment organisation, then I think we'll all be more comfortable.
Oh, no, I know that. They're really bad at the entertainment part.
Yeah,
It
at
was
least
so poorly
Well,
done
they shouldn't do
from
it.
that point of view.
They just shouldn't do it.
that's the problem. I think they
It's
could be more
unnecessary.
like the NBA if they actually had a polished media department, but their media is shocking. It really is.
They're
It's
just
so
terrible.
amateurish.
Well,
It's
when
just
you had
cringeworthy.
one of the interviewers tonight, when one of the mums said, I wasn't sure what's going on, with the pick because there was academy bid. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand what's happening here, etc. And the response is a nervous giggle. I don't know either. You're an AFL journalist at the draft night. If you don't know the draft rules and how it works and why that happened, you're not a journalist. You're not doing your job.
Well, even the bloody graphic that they threw up when those pick swots were happening, I couldn't understand what the hell they were talking about. Like, the graphic wasn't helpful either because it didn't really indicate what was going on.
What about that stupid noise to lock in the draft pick? I mean, what is it? What is it? Millionaire hot seat or is it the draft?
No. Somebody
It's
said it
just
sounded like their
pathetic.
Motorola text noise, the text noise from a Motorola circa 2006.
It's just cringeworthy. It really is. They're just so embarrassing. I just can't even take it.
Yeah.
And now just tell me that I'm being oversensitive here, okay? Please tell me. How is it that when Rowell and Anderson are interviewed, their interview is about how exciting it is to be going to the Gold Coast? Like, how exciting is that, to be going to the Gold Coast and rebuilding a club? And that's the narrative of the interview. What was the first thing that they asked Mackesy?
I don't remember, but it wasn't very inspiring.
It was, so you're going to be leaving home. How do you feel about leaving home? And now you're a lifelong Bulldog supporter.
Yeah.
And, the narrative completely changes.
Yeah.
Completely
you're right.
changes.
Which is complete and utter poor journalism. If you're there, if you're supposed to be a journalist, there are some very basic things you need to follow. And for starters, they need to follow Soledad O'Brien on Twitter. She calls journalists out. She is actually a journalist herself, but she's brilliant. Unfortunately, she focuses on the US, but I think if she ever got to see what happens in Australia, she'd tear her hair out with how poor quality we have. Regardless of whether you're a sports journalist or a news journalist, there are certain things you need to do. You do not lead interviews in the way that you just described, Pete. It's just poor.
Yeah, well, I don't think you'd hear one player selected in the NBA draft get asked about how he feels about, going to the other side of the country to play, his chosen profession. So I think, hopefully, surely, a point in time will come, Pete, where the AFL community is mature enough that it's seen as the norm and accepted and a privilege to be selected for an AFL club, irrespective of where in the country they are. But to be honest with you, I felt like most of the lads that were interviewed, even though they were quite vanilla interviews, I felt like most of them carried themselves remarkably well and navigated that kind of narrative pretty well.
Yeah. Yep.
But it's a pity that the journalists and the circus around the whole thing just hasn't grown up yet, and can't treat it like the national competition it's supposed to be. Any final say, people? Because I think if we don't, we might just wind that up.
Sounds good to me.
Looking forward to tomorrow night because it's going to be faster and probably a lot more interesting.
Yeah, there'll be lots to talk about. We'll be back to it'll be done and dusted by the time next Tuesday rolls around, but next Tuesday night will be our final podcast for 2019. So we'll obviously be reviewing the rest of the draft, having a look back at the year that was, and looking forward to what we hope will be a far more successful year in 2020. So one more to go. Thanks to everyone who's joined us on Facebook and YouTube, and of course our friends on Spreaker. As always, excellent to have you on, and you back us up with all the facts when we're just a bunch of wannabes. Peter and Nikki, thank you very much for joining me tonight on a Wednesday night, unscheduled. But I think, obviously it didn't agree with Macca, but, he's a very, very, very old man. So I guess we can...
It's his fault for being a social butterfly. And Macca, you were wrong. You made 2 calls that were going to happen, and neither of them did.
He wasn't even close to right. Wasn't even close to right. Anyway,
we were getting Stephen, and we were going to get rid of pick 22, 23 and move up.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely cooked, Macca. He's got no idea at all. His opinions are worthless.
He's grumpy. He's very grumpy.
Oh, grumpy. Oh, my God. Anyway, there we go. Look, thanks, everyone. We will see you next Tuesday for the final CrowCast at 8:30 on Tuesday night. Until then, have a good weekend, stay safe, and we'll see you then.
Night all.
Night all.